I never imagined my life would take such a dramatic turn, but here I am, living a story that seems straight out of a Hollywood movie. It all began in the quaint coastal town of Seaside Cove, where I had been working as a personal trainer at the local gym. At 25 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. I enjoyed the simplicity of my daily routine. Waking up early, hitting the gym before my clients arrived, and spending my evenings watching the sunset on the beach. Little did I know that fate had other plans for me. Plans that would completely upend my world and challenge everything I thought I knew about love, wealth, and myself. It was a Tuesday morning like any other when Victoria first walked into the gym. I remember it vividly because she stood out immediately, not just because of her designer workout gear, which was a far cry from the usual attire of our regulars, but because of the aura of confidence and power that surrounded her. At 55 years old, she carried herself with a grace and poise that commanded attention. I couldn't help but feel drawn to her, even though I knew she was far out of my league. As luck would have it, Victoria approached me that day, requesting a personal training session. I was nervous at first, intimidated by her status and the intensity of her gaze, but as we began working out together, I found myself relaxing. There was something about Victoria that put me at ease, despite our obvious differences. We talked as we exercised, and I was surprised to find that we had a lot in common. A love for the ocean, a passion for fitness, and a desire to live life to the fullest. That first session turned into regular appointments, and before I knew it, Victoria and I were spending more and more time together outside of the gym. She invited me to fancy restaurants I had only dreamed of dining at, introduced me to her high society friends, and showed me a world I had never known existed. I was captivated, not just by the luxury and excitement of it all, but by Victoria herself. She was intelligent, witty, and despite our age difference, I found myself falling for her. Of course, our budding relationship didn't go unnoticed in our small town. Whispers followed us wherever we went. The young, handsome trainer and the wealthy, older businesswoman. My friends were concerned, warning me about the potential pitfalls of such a relationship. They questioned Victoria's intentions, wondering if she saw me as nothing more than a trophy or a midlife crisis. But I knew in my heart that what we had was real. Victoria made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced before. As our relationship deepened, Victoria surprised me with a proposal. We had only been dating for a few months, but she was certain that I was the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. I was taken aback at first. Marriage had never been on my radar, especially not so soon. But as I looked into Victoria's eyes, seeing the love and hope there, I found myself saying yes. It felt right, like the next logical step in our whirlwind romance. The wedding was a lavish affair, held at Victoria's sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean. It was a far cry from the simple beach ceremony I had always imagined for myself, but I was too caught up in the moment to care. The guest list was small, mostly Victoria's high-profile friends and business associates. My own family and friends were noticeably absent, having expressed their disapproval of the rush marriage. Their absence stung, but I pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the beautiful woman standing beside me, promising to love me for the rest of our lives. After the honeymoon, a luxurious trip to the Maldives that felt like a dream, we settled into married life in Victoria's mansion. At first, everything seemed perfect. I had access to amenities I had only ever seen in movies. A private gym, a pool that seemed to stretch for miles, and a staff that catered to our every whim. But as the days went by, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. Victoria, who had always been confident and assertive, began to show a more controlling side. She insisted on choosing my clothes, dictating my schedule, and even monitoring my phone calls and text messages. She said it was out of love, that she only wanted what was best for me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself. The mansion, which had once seemed like a paradise, began to feel more like a gilded cage. Security guards patrolled the perimeter day and night, and I realized that I rarely left the property without Victoria by my side. My old friends stopped calling, put off by the strict screening process they had to go through just to visit. I found myself missing the simplicity of my old life, the freedom to go for a run on the beach whenever I wanted, or to grab a beer with my buddies after work. As the weeks turned into months, I struggled with my conflicting emotions. On one hand, I loved Victoria and was grateful for the life she had given me. She had opened my eyes to a world of possibilities I had never known existed. But on the other hand, I couldn't ignore the growing feeling of suffocation, the sense that I was no longer in control of my own life. I tried to talk to Victoria about my concerns, but she always managed to turn the conversation around, making me feel guilty for being ungrateful. She reminded me of all she had done for me, of how lucky I was to have her, and in many ways, she was right. Who was I to complain about living in a mansion, never having to worry about money again? But as I lay awake at night, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs outside our window, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake. Had I rushed into this marriage, blinded by the allure of wealth and status? Was the connection I felt with Victoria strong enough to overcome the growing distance between us? I found myself thinking back to my life before Victoria, to the simple joys I used to take for granted, the satisfaction of a hard day's work at the gym, the camaraderie I shared with my co-workers, the freedom to make my own choices, no matter how small. I missed the person I used to be, confident, independent, and sure of my place in the world. Now, as I navigate this new life, I find myself at a crossroads. Do I stay in this golden cage, enjoying the comforts and luxuries that come with being Victoria's husband? Or do I find the courage to break free, to reclaim the independence I've lost? The decision weighs heavily on me, made all the more difficult by the genuine affection I still feel for Victoria. As I stand on the balcony of our bedroom, looking out at the vast ocean stretching before me, I can't help but feel a sense of longing, not for the material things I've gained, but for the sense of self I fear I've lost. I know that whatever decision I make will change the course of my life forever. But for now, I'm trapped in this limbo, torn between the allure of wealth and the desire for personal freedom. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It's a beautiful sight, one that would have filled me with joy in my previous life. Now, it only serves as a reminder of the choice that lies before me. As the last rays of sunlight disappear below the horizon, I make a silent promise to myself. I will find a way to reconcile these two worlds, the life I had and the life I found myself in. I have to believe that there's a middle ground, a way to honor my relationship with Victoria while also staying true to myself. Tomorrow is a new day, and with it comes the opportunity for change. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I can't continue living in this state of uncertainty. It's time to have an honest conversation with Victoria, to lay all my cards on the table and see if we can find a way forward together. And if we can't, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. As I turn to go back inside, I take one last look at the darkening sky. The first stars are beginning to appear, twinkling faintly in the distance. I make a wish on one of them, just like I used to do as a kid. I wish for clarity, for courage, and for the strength to follow my heart, wherever it may lead me. With a deep breath, I step back into the house, ready to face whatever comes next. This is just the beginning of my story, and I intend to write the next chapters on my own terms. I never imagined my life would take such a dark turn. What started as a whirlwind romance has spiraled into a nightmare that I can't seem to escape. It's been 3 months since Victoria and I tied the knot in that lavish ceremony at her sprawling mansion, and every day since then has felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth of secrets and lies. The honeymoon we had planned, a luxurious getaway to the Maldives, was postponed indefinitely. Victoria cited urgent business matters, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than she let on. At first, I tried to brush off my concerns. After all, Victoria was a successful businesswoman, and I understood that her work was important. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice a pattern. Whenever I tried to steer our conversations towards her past or her previous relationships, she would deftly change the subject or suddenly remember an urgent phone call she had to make. It was subtle at first, but as time went on, the evasions became more obvious, leaving a cloud of suspicion hanging over our relationship. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of our opulent bedroom, my mind racing with questions. Who was this woman I had married? What secrets was she hiding? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about Victoria's life before me. She had always been vague about her past, and I had been too caught up in the whirlwind of our romance to push for details. Now, those gaps in my knowledge felt like gaping chasms, threatening to swallow me whole. It was on one of these sleepless nights that I made a discovery that would change everything. Unable to quiet my restless mind, I decided to explore the mansion, hoping that a walk might help clear my head. As I wandered through the dimly lit corridors, I found myself in Victoria's study. I had been in this room before, but always under her watchful eye. Now, alone in the silence of the night, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small keypad hidden behind a painting. My heart raced as I stood before it, my fingers hovering over the buttons. I knew I shouldn't, that this was a violation of Victoria's privacy, but the need to know the truth overpowered my hesitation. To my surprise, the code was simple: our wedding date. The painting swung open, revealing a hidden safe. Inside, I found a stack of documents that made my blood run cold. Marriage certificates, death certificates, news clippings, all neatly organized and dated. As I leafed through the papers with trembling hands, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Victoria had been married before. Not once, not twice, but 5 times. And each marriage had ended the same way, with the death of her husband, heart attacks, accidents, sudden illnesses, all seemingly natural causes. But the pattern was undeniable. I don't know how long I stood there, my mind reeling from what I had discovered. The sun was beginning to rise by the time I carefully replaced the documents and closed the safe. My world forever altered. How could I look at Victoria the same way again? How could I sleep beside her, knowing what I now knew? From that moment on, everything changed. Victoria's behavior, which I had previously attributed to her strong personality, now took on a sinister edge. She became increasingly possessive, monitoring my every move. I couldn't leave the house without a security guard accompanying me, ostensibly for my own protection. But I knew better now. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage, and Victoria held the key. I tried to reach out to my old friends, desperate for someone to confide in, but Victoria always seemed to be one step ahead. Phone calls were mysteriously disconnected, text messages went unanswered, and any attempts to meet in person were thwarted by last-minute emergencies that required my presence at the mansion. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was being watched, my every move monitored and reported back to Victoria. The feeling of being constantly observed was suffocating. I found myself second-guessing every action, every word. Was that painting always tilted at that angle, or was it hiding a camera? Was the maid really just dusting that vase, or was she eavesdropping on my conversations? Paranoia became my constant companion, eating away at my sanity bit by bit. As the days wore on, I began to feel like a character in one of those psychological thrillers I used to enjoy watching. Except this wasn't a movie, and there was no guarantee of a happy ending. I knew I had to find a way out, but how? Victoria's reach seemed endless. her influence permeating every aspect of my life. In desperation, I started to plan my escape. I squirreled away small amounts of cash whenever I could, hiding it in various spots around the mansion. I memorized the guards' rotation schedules, looking for any potential gaps in security. I even went so far as to create a fake email account on a library computer during one of my rare supervised outings, hoping to reach out to an old friend for help. But Victoria, ever vigilant, discovered my plans. I'll never forget the look in her eyes when she confronted me, a mixture of rage, hurt, and something else, something cold and calculating that sent chills down my spine. The argument that followed was explosive. Accusations flew back and forth. Secrets were revealed, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip completely from the woman I had thought I loved. In the heat of the moment, I did something reckless. I ran. I don't know what I was thinking. Where could I possibly go? But in that instant, all I knew was that I had to get away. I managed to slip past the guards and into the surrounding woods, my heart pounding in my chest as I ran blindly through the underbrush. For a few precious hours, I tasted freedom again. The feel of the wind on my face, the sound of leaves crunching under my feet. It was intoxicating. But as the sun began to set and the reality of my situation sank in, I knew I couldn't stay out here forever. I had no money, no phone, and no idea where I was. And so, with a heavy heart, I made my way back to the mansion. Victoria was waiting for me when I returned, her face a mask of concern. To anyone else, she would have looked like a worried wife relieved at her husband's safe return. But I knew better now. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the wheels turning as she assessed the situation and planned her next move. As I stand here now, back in the opulent prison that was once my dream home, I can't help but wonder what the future holds. The tension between Victoria and me is palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. I know that things can't continue like this, but I'm at a loss as to how to change them. Every move I make feels like another step in a dangerous game of chess, and I'm terrified of making the wrong one. But one thing is clear, I can't give up. Somewhere out there, beyond these gilded walls and manicured lawns, my old life is waiting for me. My freedom, my identity, my very soul, they're all out there, just beyond my reach. And no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, I will find a way to reclaim them. Because if there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's that life is precious and fragile, and I'm not ready to become just another name on Victoria's list of deceased husbands. This is my story, and I intend to write my own ending, one way or another. I never thought I'd be narrating my own death, but here I am, a silent observer to the chaos that has erupted in the wake of my demise. It was a beautiful night, the kind that would have taken my breath away if I still had any left to give. Victoria and I had just finished a lavish dinner on the terrace, the candlelight flickering across her face, casting shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. I remember feeling uneasy, a familiar sensation that had become my constant companion in recent months. If only I had known it would be my last meal. The gardens were always my favorite part of the estate, a place where I could almost forget the gilded cage I was living in. That night, as I walked among the meticulously manicured hedges and fragrant roses, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. It was as if someone had plunged a knife into my heart, twisting it with cruel precision. I remember falling, the soft grass cushioning my descent as the world around me began to fade. The last thing I saw was Victoria's face, looming over me, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. When I came to, it was as a spectral presence, watching as the scene unfolded before me like some macabre theater production. My body lay sprawled on the lawn, lifeless eyes staring up at the star-studded sky. Victoria's anguished cries pierced the night air as she cradled my head in her lap, her tears falling onto my still face. It was a convincing performance, I'll give her that. If I hadn't spent the last few months living in fear of this very moment, I might have believed her grief was genuine. The arrival of the police shattered the eerie calm that had settled over the estate. Flashing lights painted the manicured grounds in surreal shades of red and blue as officers swarmed the scene. I watched as Victoria recounted the events of the evening, her voice trembling with emotion as she described how she had found me collapsed in the garden. To the untrained eye, she was the picture of a grieving widow. But I noticed a slight hesitation in her voice when asked about our last conversation, the way her eyes darted to the left when describing the moments before my collapse. These were tells I had come to recognize during our marriage, subtle signs that Victoria was constructing a narrative rather than recounting the truth. As I hovered unseen among the investigators, I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. Surely, they would see through Victoria's act. Surely, they would uncover the truth about my death and the sinister pattern that had led to this moment. But as the night wore on, I began to realize that Victoria's web of deceit was far more intricate than I had ever imagined. The following days were a blur of activity as my death was investigated. I watched helplessly as the coroner performed the autopsy, his practiced hands methodically examining my earthly remains. When he discovered traces of a rare substance in my system, I felt a surge of vindication. This was it, the smoking gun that would expose Victoria's crimes. But to my frustration, the significance of this finding seemed to be lost in the sea of medical jargon and bureaucratic procedures. As news of my untimely demise spread, I saw my friends gathering, their faces etched with grief and confusion. In hushed tones, they spoke of the changes they had noticed in me over the past months, how I had become withdrawn, paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. They recounted instances where I had hinted at feeling trapped, at fearing for my safety. These conversations sparked the interest of a few astute detectives, who began to dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding my death. But Victoria, ever the master manipulator, was always one step ahead. She wove a tale of a troubled marriage, of my struggles with mental health and substance abuse. She painted herself as a devoted wife, trying desperately to help her unstable husband. It was a narrative that was all too easy for people to believe, fitting neatly into societal expectations and preconceptions. I wanted to scream, to shake them all and make them see the truth, but my voice was silent, my presence unfelt. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a new player entered the scene. A private detective, hired by my family who had grown suspicious of the circumstances surrounding my death, began to unravel the tapestry of lies Victoria had so carefully constructed. I watched with growing excitement as he pieced together the puzzle of Victoria's past, uncovering a disturbing pattern that spanned decades. The detective's investigation revealed a trail of dead husbands, each case bearing striking similarities to my own. Wealthy men, all significantly older than Victoria, who had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after their marriages. Heart attacks, accidents, sudden illnesses, all seemingly natural causes, but when viewed together, they formed a chilling pattern of calculated elimination. As the detective dug deeper, he uncovered financial records showing how Victoria had systematically drained each husband's accounts before their untimely deaths. He found witnesses who had seen Victoria with suspicious substances, heard her making cryptic phone calls late at night. Slowly but surely, the true picture of the woman I had married began to emerge. I felt a mix of vindication and sorrow as I watched the case against Victoria build. Vindication that the truth was finally coming to light, that my fears and suspicions were being proven right, but also a deep, aching sorrow for the life I had lost, for the future that had been stolen from me. I thought of all the other men who had fallen victim to Victoria's deadly charm, wondering if their spirits too were watching, waiting for justice to be served. The investigation took an unexpected turn when the detective uncovered a hidden safe in Victoria's study. The same safe I had discovered on that fateful night months ago. Inside, he found the damning evidence I had seen. The marriage certificates, death certificates, and news clippings that chronicle Victoria's deadly marital history. It was the breakthrough the case needed, the irrefutable proof that would finally bring Victoria's reign of terror to an end. As I watched the police arrive at the mansion with a warrant for Victoria's arrest, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, of course, that justice would be served. But there was also a lingering sadness for what might have been. In another life, in another world, perhaps Victoria and I could have had a genuine love story. But that possibility had been poisoned long before I ever entered the picture. Victoria's arrest was a spectacle, broadcast live on every news channel. I watched as she was led away in handcuffs, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the real Victoria. Not the charming socialite or the grieving widow, but a cold, calculating predator who had finally been caught. As the case against Victoria builds, I find myself in a strange limbo. My earthly journey has ended, but I'm tethered to this plane by the need to see justice served. I watch as my family and friends struggle to come to terms with the truth of what happened to me, as they grapple with guilt and anger over not having seen the signs sooner. I wish I could comfort them, tell them that there was nothing they could have done, that Victoria's deception was too perfect, too practiced to have been easily detected. In the end, I realize that my story, tragic as it is, may serve a greater purpose. Perhaps it will be a cautionary tale, a warning to others who might fall prey to someone like Victoria. Maybe it will inspire changes in how suspicious deaths are investigated, preventing future victims from sharing my fate. And for those who loved me, I hope it brings some measure of closure, some peace in knowing the truth. As I prepare to move on to whatever comes next, I take one last look at the world I'm leaving behind. The mansion that was once my prison now stands empty, its opulent rooms echoing with the ghosts of secrets and lies. Victoria, the woman I thought I knew, faces a future behind bars, her web of deceit finally unraveled. And me? I'm ready to let go, to embrace whatever awaits me beyond this earthly realm. My story may have ended in tragedy, but in death, I found a freedom that eluded me in life. As I fade from this world, I carry with me the hope that my tale will make a difference, that some good will come from the darkness I endured. And so, I bid farewell to the living, grateful for the justice that has been served, and ready to embrace the peace that has been so long denied to me. I never thought I'd witness my own murder investigation unfold, but here I am, a silent spectator to the unraveling of Victoria's carefully constructed web of lies. It's surreal, watching detectives piece together the puzzle of my death, uncovering secrets that I had only begun to suspect in the final months of my life. The truth, as it turns out, is far more sinister than even my wildest paranoid imaginings. Detective James Hawthorne, a grizzled veteran with eyes that have seen too much, has become my unlikely champion. I've watched him tirelessly pursue every lead, his determination to uncover the truth growing with each piece of evidence he unearths. It was Hawthorne who first connected the dots between Victoria's past and her penchant for toxic substances. He discovered a pattern of purchases dating back years. Rare chemicals, obscure plants known for their poisonous properties, all acquired through a network of shady contacts that Victoria had cultivated over time. But it wasn't just the poisons that painted a damning picture. Hawthorne's investigation revealed a complex web of financial manipulation that spanned decades. Victoria, it seemed, had perfected the art of slowly draining her husband's accounts, moving money through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies. By the time each husband met their untimely end, their fortunes had been skillfully siphoned away, leaving Victoria as the sole beneficiary of their considerably diminished estates. As I hover unseen in Hawthorne's office, I can't help but feel a mix of vindication and horror. The meticulous notes spread across his desk tell the story of not just my demise, but of all the men who came before me. Each file represents a life cut short, a future stolen by the woman we had all trusted with our hearts and our lives. The weight of this revelation is almost too much to bear, even in my incorporeal state. The breakthrough in the case came when Hawthorne finally obtained a warrant to search Victoria's mansion, our home, though it never truly felt like one to me. I followed the team of investigators as they combed through every room, watching with bated breath as they uncovered secret compartments and hidden safes. But nothing could have prepared me for what they found in Victoria's private study. Tucked away behind a false panel, the detectives discovered a leather-bound journal. As Hawthorne carefully leafed through its pages, I felt a chill that transcended my ghostly form. There, in Victoria's elegant handwriting, was a detailed account of her marriages, all of them. She had meticulously documented each relationship, from the initial meeting to the carefully orchestrated deaths. The journal read like a twisted love letter to murder, each entry more chilling than the last. I watched as Hawthorne's face grew pale, his hands trembling slightly as he turned page after page. The level of calculation, the cold precision with which Victoria had planned and executed each death, was beyond anything we had imagined. She hadn't just killed her husbands. She had studied them, learning their habits, their weaknesses, tailoring each murder to appear as natural as possible. My own entry was there, the final chapter in her book of death. I read over Hawthorne's shoulder, my non-existent heart racing, as I saw my life through Victoria's eyes. She described our meeting, our whirlwind romance, but with a clinical detachment that made my blood run cold. To her, I had never been a person, never been someone to love. I was simply her next target, a means to an end. The confrontation between Victoria and the investigators was a masterclass in manipulation. I watched as she maintained her composure, her face a mask of innocent confusion, as Hawthorne laid out the evidence against her. She denied everything, of course, her voice steady as she painted a picture of me as an unstable, paranoid man who had ultimately been the architect of his own demise. Jack was troubled, she said, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears. I tried so hard to help him, to save him from himself, but in the end, his demons were too strong. Her performance was flawless, and for a moment, I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of some of the younger officers. But Hawthorne remained unmoved, his gaze steady as he continued to press her. Just when it seemed Victoria might wriggle her way out of the accusations, fate intervened in the form of an anonymous witness. A gardener, who had been working late on the night of my death, came forward with a crucial piece of information. He had seen Victoria adding something to my drink when she thought no one was looking, just hours before I was found dead in the garden. This testimony was a final nail in Victoria's coffin. I watched as the color drained from her face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. In that moment, I saw the real Victoria emerge, cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. The media frenzy that followed Victoria's arrest was unlike anything I had ever seen. Our story was splashed across every newspaper, dissected on every news channel. People who had once admired Victoria for her charm and philanthropy now recoiled in horror at the true nature of the woman they thought they knew. As I watched my friends and family grapple with the truth, I felt a profound sense of sadness. They had been right to worry about me, right to question my sudden marriage to Victoria. The guilt and anguish on their faces were almost too much to bear. I wished I could reach out to them, tell them that it wasn't their fault, that Victoria's deception had fooled us all. In the days following Victoria's arrest, more victims' families came forward, men who had died years, even decades ago, their cases long closed and forgotten. Victoria's reign of terror had spanned a lifetime, leaving a trail of broken families and stolen futures in its wake. As the case against Victoria builds, I find myself at a crossroads. Part of me wants to stay, to see this through to the end, to witness justice being served. But another part of me knows that it's time to let go. My story has been told, my truth uncovered. Whatever happens next is for the living to deal with. I take one last look at the world I'm leaving behind, at Hawthorne, hunched over his desk, still piecing together the full extent of Victoria's crimes, at my family and friends, finding solace in each other as they come to terms with the truth, at Victoria, sitting alone in a cell, her empire of lies finally crumbled around her. As I prepare to move on to whatever comes next, I'm filled with a sense of peace I haven't felt since before I met Victoria. My death may have been tragic, but in its aftermath, a greater truth has been revealed. Lives may be saved, families may find closure, all because of what happened to me. And so, with a final glance at the world of the living, I let go. My story is over, but its impact will ripple outward, touching lives in ways I never could have imagined. As I fade away, I carry with me the hope that some good will come from this tragedy, that my death will serve as a warning and a catalyst for change. In the end, that's all any of us can hope for, that our lives and even our deaths have meaning. And in that sense, perhaps I've achieved more in death than I ever did in life. With that comforting thought, I surrender to the light, ready to embrace whatever awaits me on the other side. I never imagined I'd be witnessing my own murder trial from beyond the grave, but here I am, an invisible spectator in a courtroom packed with faces both familiar and strange. The air is thick with tension as Victoria, the woman I once called my wife, sits at the defense table, her posture rigid and her eyes cold. It's surreal to see her like this, stripped of her usual charm and elegance, reduced to a defendant in an orange jumpsuit. As the trial unfolds, I'm struck by the sheer volume of evidence the prosecution has amassed against Victoria. Financial documents are presented, meticulously detailing how she systematically drained the accounts of her previous husbands before their untimely deaths. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Brennan, paints a damning picture of Victoria as a black widow, weaving a web of deceit and manipulation that spanned decades. I watch as Victoria's defense team scrambles to counter these allegations. They argue that I had pre-existing health conditions, that my death was a tragic accident rather than a calculated murder. But even as they speak, I can see the doubt in the jurors' eyes. The evidence is simply too overwhelming, the pattern too clear to be dismissed as mere coincidence. One by one, my friends and family take the stand. Their testimonies are heart-wrenching to hear. My best friend, Mike, describes how I became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn after marrying Victoria. It was like he was a different person, he says, his voice thick with emotion. The Jack I knew was outgoing, always up for an adventure. But in those last few months, he was a shell of himself. He'd call me in the middle of the night, talking about feeling watched, about how he couldn't trust anyone. My sister, Emily, testifies about a conversation we had just weeks before my death. He told me he was scared, she says, tears streaming down her face. He said that if anything happened to him, I should look into Victoria's past. I didn't take him seriously then. I thought he was just being dramatic. God, I wish I had listened. As I hover unseen above the courtroom, I'm overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. There's anger, of course, at Victoria for what she's done, not just to me but to all the men who came before. But there's also a profound sadness for the pain my death has caused those I love. I wish I could reach out, tell them it's not their fault, that Victoria's deception was too perfect, too practiced for anyone to have seen through it in time. The trial takes an unexpected turn when a surprise witness is called. It's a woman named Claire, who identifies herself as Victoria's former roommate from college. Her testimony is like a bomb going off in the courtroom. She describes a young Victoria who was obsessed with true crime stories, particularly those involving wealthy men who died under mysterious circumstances. She used to joke about marrying rich and becoming a widow, Claire says, her voice shaking. I always thought she was kidding, but now I'm not so sure. As Claire speaks, I see Victoria's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. For the first time since the trial began, she looks genuinely shaken. It's as if she realizes that her past, which she's worked so hard to bury, is finally catching up with her. The prosecution's closing arguments are a masterpiece of storytelling. Sarah Brennan weaves together the financial evidence, the testimonies, and the pattern of suspicious deaths into a narrative that's impossible to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she says, her voice ringing out in the hushed courtroom. What we have here is not a series of tragic accidents or coincidences. What we have is a calculated, long-term scheme orchestrated by a woman who saw her husbands not as partners, but as prey. As the jury files out to deliberate, I find myself wishing I could feel the nervous anticipation that permeates the courtroom. But in my spectral state, I'm oddly detached. I already know the truth, after all. I've lived it, or rather, died because of it. The deliberation doesn't take long. When the jury returns, their faces are grim. The foreman stands and in a clear voice delivers the verdict, guilty on all counts. Victoria's face remains impassive, but I see her hands clench into fists beneath the table. The judge's sentence is swift and severe. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Victoria is led away in handcuffs, I feel a strange sense of closure. It won't bring me back, won't undo the pain she's caused, but at least she won't be able to hurt anyone else. In the days and weeks that follow my story, our story becomes national news. Talk shows dissect every detail of the case. True crime podcasts dedicate entire series to Victoria's reign of terror. But beyond the sensationalism, I'm heartened to see that some good is coming from this tragedy. Discussions about age gaps in relationships take on a new urgency. People start talking about the importance of really knowing your partner's past, of being aware of red flags in relationships. Support groups spring up for families of victims of similar crimes, providing a space for healing and understanding. As the media frenzy begins to die down, I find myself lingering, not quite ready to move on. I watch as my family and friends begin the slow process of healing. They gather for a memorial service, sharing stories and memories of the person I was before Victoria entered my life. It's bittersweet to see them laugh through their tears as they recount some of my more ridiculous adventures. I see Detective Hawthorne, the man who unraveled Victoria's web of lies, receive a commendation for his work on the case. He stands at a podium, looking uncomfortable in the spotlight, and dedicates the award to all of Victoria's victims. This case taught me that we can never stop digging for the truth, he says. No matter how perfect the surface looks, there might be darkness lurking beneath. As time passes, I begin to feel a pull towards something beyond this earthly plane. It's as if, now that justice has been served and my story has been told, I'm finally free to move on. But before I go, I take one last look at the world I'm leaving behind. I see my sister, Emily, volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her experience to help others recognize the signs of manipulation and control in relationships. I see Mike starting a foundation in my name, dedicated to raising awareness about financial abuse in marriages. And in a maximum security prison, I see Victoria. She sits alone in her cell, surrounded by the consequences of her actions. For a moment, I feel a flicker of pity for her. What kind of pain, what kind of emptiness must drive a person to do what she did? But then I remember all the lives she's destroyed, all the futures she's stolen, and the pity fades. As I prepare to leave this world behind, I'm filled with a sense of peace I haven't felt since before I met Victoria. My death was tragic, yes, but it wasn't meaningless. It sparked conversations, raised awareness, maybe even saved lives. In death, I've accomplished something I never could have in life. And so, with one last look at the world of the living, I let go. I don't know what awaits me on the other side, but I face it without fear. My story is over, but its impact will continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways I never could have imagined. And in that sense, perhaps I've achieved a kind of immortality after all. As I fade away, my last thought is one of hope. Hope that those left behind will find healing, that they'll learn from my story, and that somewhere out there, someone will read about this case and recognize the warning signs before it's too late. With that comforting thought, I surrender to the light, ready to embrace whatever comes next in this grand, mysterious adventure we call existence. As I watch Victoria being led away in handcuffs, her designer clothes replaced by a drab prison uniform, I can't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, that justice has finally been served. Sadness for the lives she's destroyed, including my own, and a lingering sense of disbelief that this is how my story ends. It's surreal to think that just a year ago, I was a carefree personal trainer, my biggest worry being whether I'd make rent that month. Now, I'm a cautionary tale, a headline in the news, a topic for true crime podcasts. From my vantage point beyond the veil, I watch as Victoria is processed into the prison system. The woman who once commanded rooms with her presence, who could charm anyone with a smile and a well-placed compliment, now shuffles along in shackles. Her face, once animated and alluring, is now a mask of cold indifference. I wonder what's going through her mind. Does she feel remorse for what she's done? Or is she already plotting her next move, even from behind bars? The first few weeks of Victoria's incarceration are a flurry of activity. She's assigned a cell, given a routine, introduced to the harsh realities of prison life. I watch as she tries to maintain her air of superiority, to manipulate the system as she's always done. But prison is a great equalizer, and even Victoria's considerable charms fall flat against the indifference of guards and the hostility of fellow inmates. As the months turn into years, I see a change come over Victoria. The carefully maintained facade begins to crack. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, grows out, revealing streaks of gray. The smooth skin of her face develops lines and wrinkles. Without her usual array of creams and treatments, time begins to catch up with her. It's a stark reminder that even someone who seemed almost superhuman in her ability to deceive and manipulate is, in the end, just as mortal as the rest of us. I find myself wondering about the other men Victoria married and murdered. Are their spirits watching too? Do they feel the same mix of vindication and sorrow that I do? I imagine us as a ghostly jury, bearing silent witness to Victoria's punishment. It's not revenge we seek. That's a concept that seems petty and meaningless from this side of existence. No! What we want is justice, and the assurance that she can never hurt anyone else the way she hurt us. As Victoria serves her life sentence, the world outside the prison walls moves on. My family and friends, who were so devastated by my death, begin to heal. I watch as my sister Emily gets married, wishing I could be there to walk her down the aisle. I see my best friend Mike become a father, naming his son Jack in my memory. These moments are bittersweet. I'm happy for them, proud of the lives they're building, but there's an ache of longing for the future I'll never have. The case that ended my life and put Victoria behind bars continues to have ripple effects long after the trial. Laws are proposed and passed, aimed at protecting vulnerable individuals from predatory marriages. Support groups spring up for families of victims of similar crimes. My story becomes a case study in criminal psychology classes, dissected and analyzed by students trying to understand the mind of a black widow killer. Years pass, and Victoria's notoriety fades. She becomes just another lifer. Her days a monotonous blur of meals, yard time, and nights spent staring at the ceiling of her cell. I wonder if she ever thinks about me, about the other men whose lives she cut short. Does she regret her actions, or only the fact that she got caught? As I observe Victoria's life sentence unfold, I'm struck by the irony of it all. She, who was so afraid of aging, of losing her beauty and power, is now forced to watch helplessly as time takes its toll. The prison becomes a mirror, reflecting back the truth she tried so hard to outrun, that she is, in the end, just as mortal as the rest of us. But even as Victoria wastes away in prison, I find that my own spirit is becoming lighter. The anger and confusion that tethered me to the earthly plane begin to dissipate. I start to feel a pull towards something else, something beyond this realm of existence. It's as if, now that justice has been served and my story has been told, I'm finally free to move on. Before I go, I take one last look at the world I'm leaving behind. I see the positive changes that have come from my tragic end, the awareness raised, the lives potentially saved. I see my loved ones still carry me in their hearts, but no longer crippled by grief. And I see Victoria, alone in her cell, facing the consequences of her actions for the rest of her mortal life. As I prepare to move on to whatever comes next, I'm filled with a sense of peace I haven't felt since before I met Victoria. My death was tragic, yes, but it wasn't meaningless. It sparked conversations, raised awareness, maybe even saved lives. In death, I've accomplished something I never could have in life. And so, with one last look at the world of the living, I let go. I don't know what awaits me on the other side, but I face it without fear. My story is over, but its impact will continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways I never could have imagined. And in that sense, perhaps I've achieved a kind of immortality after all. As I fade away, my last thought is one of hope. Hope that those left behind will find healing, that they'll learn from my story, and that somewhere out there, someone will read about this case and recognize the warning signs before it's too late. With that comforting thought, I surrender to the light, ready to embrace whatever comes next in this grand, mysterious adventure we call existence. In the end, justice has prevailed, not just for me, but for all of Victoria's victims. She will spend the rest of her days behind bars, stripped of the power and allure she once wielded so effectively. It's not a happy ending. There are no truly happy endings in stories like these, but it's a just one. And sometimes, justice is the best we can hope for. As I finally let go of my earthly tethers, I feel a sense of completion. My story, tragic as it was, has served a purpose. It shed light on a dark corner of human nature, sparked important conversations, and maybe, just maybe, saved some lives along the way. And isn't that, in the end, the best legacy anyone can hope to leave behind? So I bid farewell to the world of the living, to the courtrooms and prison cells, to the loved ones still mourning my loss. I leave behind a tale of caution, a reminder to look beneath the surface, to question the too good to be true. And as I drift away, I carry with me the hope that my story will continue to make a difference long after I'm gone. Gulvie Victoria. Goodbye, world. My journey here is over, but the ripples of my story will continue to spread, touching lives and changing hearts long after I've moved on to whatever comes next. And in that knowledge, I find peace.